for me, colonialism and capitalism are the same thing.
The Kingston Canadian Film Festival proudly presents Rewind Fast Forward, a podcast where we chat with filmmakers about their work and the future of the Canadian cinema. My name is Thom Ernst. Welcome.
It's been ages since I caught your eye.
Today's guest is Jeff Barnaby. Barnaby is a successful filmmaker, writer, composer. He's an editor and director. His stylistic rhymes for Young Ghouls and the highly effective zombie horror thriller Blood Quantum both found sizable and very appreciative audiences. I mean, I could tag on that he's Canadian and no stranger to the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, but that's my own personal pride jumping in. So how important is it to point out that Barnaby is a Micmac filmmaker, writer, composer, and editor? Well, it isn't, and yet it is. No question Barnaby's work has a distinct point of clarity directly related to the Indigenous culture, and that's important to talk about. But his films, both in style and narrative, are universal, and that's important to recognize. So join me now as I talk cinema, zombies, and quarantine with director Jeff Barnaby. It's great to see you again, Jeff.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you join us on Rewind Fast Forward. One of the reasons that you came up in mind is your films, definitely. Also the fact that Kingston has shown your films, and the film festival likes to revisit the directors who've been so kind as to have their films represented at the festival. Well, let's start with the most recent, and that for me is Blood Quantum. And one of the things I think I will kick things off with is when I reviewed Blood Quantum as a film critic, I thought I was being very clever and wise by aligning it with Fort Apache, John Ford's Fort Apache, and kind of saying it's the reverse of John Ford's Fort Apache. And then when chatting to you, you didn't see the same illusion, and I thought to myself, well, there we go. Am I putting on a political emphasis on a film that need not have a political emphasis? Not to put too fine a point on this, if I was talking to George A. Romero, rest his soul, I probably wouldn't ask if it was a revised version of Fort Apache. Are you, as just to start off with a tough question, are you as an Indigenous creator, as an artist, forever going to have to deal with the fact that people like me are going to assume that there's more meaning behind a horror film than actually is?
No, I think that's a pretty safe assumption, even if the director, because just by virtue of being alive and making a film in an industry that has traditionally used the format to either misrepresent or malign Native people, just by virtue of being Native, after 100 plus years of seeing that in the industry, that in and of itself is a political act. So I don't think it's remiss to sit there and say that you're going to interpret Native people making films as a political act, because really it is. It's when you're a subject of colonialism, which includes genocide and erasure, I think surviving to the point where you're still around to tell those stories isn't of a political act, just by virtue of being in an environment that's been trying to murder you, essentially. So I think it's not really up to the director, as crazy as that sounds. You could sit there and say, well, I don't want to make it political. That in and of itself, it is. So there is no avoiding it. I just think you need to be super remiss of it. Like, I know what I'm doing with my films, but at the same time, I don't try to make that the point of my films, if that makes any sense. Like, I think you're going to bring in whatever politics into the theater you're going to bring in, but you don't need a filmmaker to help tell you that Native people are oppressed. So I think just by virtue of ignoring all those politics, you're saying something too. I've never really set out to make a movie that pulpit dumps to people. I've never done that with rhymes. I didn't do it with Blood Quantum. I just knew about the politics and decided to address them in a way that wasn't going to be heavy-handed. And you think that, you think that a film where Native people are immune to zombie plague, you think, that would be rampant with a lot of political ideology, but it isn't. Because I felt like, to a certain extent, as an artist, you need to bring those ideas into the narrative, but at the same time, I don't think it suits your role as an entertainer, which is what you are as a filmmaker. You're ultimately an entertainer. So I kind of try to put that foot forward first and bake in the politics, where no matter who is in the roles, who's carrying forth the narrative, you have to address them. And in this case, it wasn't like any particular ideology of any of the characters. It was the physical environment is making you address the ideas. And it's kind of what I did with rhymes too. I don't really create the situations. I put characters in place to deal with them. And not because they're crusaders, but because it's a matter of survival. That's always kind of been, so my characters have always been anti-heroes almost, because none of them are doing anything out of altruism. They're doing it out of survival.
That, what, I find that an essential point in watching both of your films. And I'm going to get the title wrong of the wonderful film that came out this past year called "The Body Remembers What the World Has Broken," something to that effect. Is the concept of survival and doing what you have to do with survival. In Rhyme for Young Ghouls, we have this wonderful character who is involved with the drug culture, which as an outsider is a difficult character to side with. In The World Remembers What the Body Has Broken, or The Body Remembers What the World Has Broken, we have a character who steals from the very person trying to help her. If you step back, you realize that these are essential survival techniques. And there's a certain amount of bravery in allowing your hero to do what they have to do and not what will appease an audience, particularly an audience who may not necessarily be on the inside enough to know the struggles.
I guess so. I mean, but that's kind of what being on the inside really is. You don't even think about it like that. Like, is the audience going to sympathize with my character? I've never thought of it like that at all. I bend to the will of the characters, I guess you could say. And you're just trying to be fair and honest with what they're going to do. Because I find those films, they're kind of positivity porn films where you don't, like, you talk to any minority director or artist, and they'll all tell you the same thing, in that they have a hard time venturing into those realms of giving you characters that make morally ambiguous or just morally immoral decisions, because film has a tendency to project the individual from that culture as the whole. You're seeing the tree for the forest. So if you have a drug raping, pederast mental case as main character, you have a white audience that's going to say, well, then all Native people are like that. So, I mean, that's obviously absurd on both ends. So I think as a minority director, you don't want to have any negative connotations associated with your characters. I mean, that was a big criticism about Rhymes. It said it was so negative. And it's just like, well, when you talk about the subject matter it's dealing with, how do you do that in a positive way? And it's not to say that the characters aren't gonna, to me, my philosophy with Rhymes was, if she survives at the end, everything she does to get there is justified, because she's been up against the system for 100 years now that's been trying to wipe her out. So anything she does to get to the end is justified. So I never really, that was my moral compass. Basically, almost anything goes. And you see her do crazy things, like she puts, children in danger. She kind of hustles her family. She sets up her dad. I mean, she does all kinds of crazy things that in any other character, I think would be turn-offs, would be deal breakers. But with her, when you project it against the history of what she went through, all of a sudden it becomes justifiable. So I never really, my characters don't have moral compasses because the environments they were brought up in are completely immoral. So it's a matter of what do I need to do in order to get to the end point of this or to achieve my goals.
Yeah, I think that resonates loud and clear in both of your films, and particularly Rhymes, because I may have been one of those critics who misunderstood Rhymes when I first saw it. Fortunately, part of our jobs is see films again, particularly when given perspective. And yeah, it allowed me to look at the film after reading critics who did understand the film better. And it allowed me to look at the film from a different perspective. Then again, when I got to The Body Remembers, I had that, I had your film previously to sort of prepare me or enlighten me, I suppose, in the road that this woman had to go through. But in either way, you called yourself an entertainer, which of course you are. Wouldn't it be great to sort of just shrug this burden of being an Indigenous director and just be a filmmaker?
Well, I think you can. I think it's a choice because it's the audience that politicizes the images. It's not the director, I don't think. I mean, we aren't the ones that use native imagery for 100 years to sell, everything under the sun and to entertain people and to use native people as villains in Westerns. Like, we're not the ones that did that. So I think just you can go out and make a film, and I think the audience is going to bring those politics into the theater with them, regardless of what you do. Mm. So I think as a native person, you don't need to care. You don't need to make a political movie. You don't need to be like, oh, I'm doing this for my people. You don't need to do any of that shit. You just need to go out there and be honest to your characters and honest to your artwork. And if it's good, then none of that stuff will matter anyway. I think that the climate we're in right now, and there's currency to making films like that. So I think that's going to bring about a lot of posturing and a lot of people that don't get it. I mean, you see that in industry right now, right? I mean, the metric for representation in industry is white writers, white directors, white storytellers telling Black stories, Native stories, and, BIPOC stories. When it's like, it matters who's telling those stories. You're just going to, keep doing your version of the white savior. So yeah. I think there needs to be a director out there like that who says, I don't care about any of that stuff. We're just going to approach the story with all the tools that we know we have in our toolbox to make it better. Like, what I do is try to strike a happy medium. Like, you bring up Romero. Romero does Dawn of the Dead. When I watched Dawn of the Dead as a kid, I was thinking, well, here's a great lambast of American consumerism. I was just like, hey, zombies and bikers in a mall. So you can make a film like that where the audience can go in and appreciate it for being zombies and bikers in a mall without understanding the, message of consumerism. Because you really didn't start hearing that until years later. Oh, it's a message of consumerism. Maybe it isn't just about zombies. So I think you can strike both chords, where you can go out and you can make a film for entertainment purposes and still put a message behind it, even though the audience doesn't quite understand what the message is. I don't think it depreciates from their enjoyment of the film. There's actually one more thought on that. There's actually a flip side to that too. When you're pumping the market full of superhero movies, where you get these superpower entities going out and solving all the world's problems. I mean, well, what could that be a metaphor for? if not totalitarianism or fascism, where you're using violence or you're using, other means of coercion to, go out there and solve political problems. And they're doing it under this guise of wokeness too, where again, because they're putting BIPOC people in those roles, it's about representation, whereas that representation is distinctly Western and distinctly capitalistic. So you're getting, you're getting an industry that's just coming to terms with the idea that they've been fucking it up for the past 100 years. So they're like taking little baby steps in order to rectify what's happened. And the first one is like, hey, maybe we should have Native people actually play Native roles. That would be interesting. So you're going from that, which is like still an issue in this day and age, like getting Native people to play Native roles, to why don't you let Native people direct the roles? Why don't you give them $35 million to see what they're going to do with it? Nobody's made that leap yet. So we'll see. You see Black people in those roles. Black Panther, obviously, everything Jordan Peele is doing, but Native people who've had a much more. I mean, it wouldn't be remiss to say that Native people have been the most exploited image in cinematic history. I don't think that's I don't think that's a grand statement. I think that's pretty true, and I think anybody could sit there and say, yeah, that's true. Why is it that you have an industry that has made billions of dollars off that image? Why are they so scared to hand it back to Native people? That's really when you start unpacking, what's going on in the entertainment industry, when you start asking questions like that.
Those are good questions. And the fact that we do have people like you working, and mostly a lot of Indigenous filmmakers are documentarians as well, which is sort of progressing it and paving the way as we go forward. But one of the things I was thinking about, not that I expect you to be inside George Romero's head, but do you think that this idea of consumerism was in his mind when he made the film? Or did he just make the best film he could make, and somehow his own political needs and ideas fell in place? And I guess I'm asking that because of your own filmmaking too.
Absolutely. I think when you talk about the minutia, when you're a director, when you talk about the minutia of everyday directing, there's no way that didn't come up. But I've done this before, where I've been doing films like did a short film called The Colony, where this guy who lives in a trailer gets infested. The trailer gets infested by a bunch of cockroaches, and he thinks the cockroaches are taking over his life, and they colonized me. And I had this guy who's been working with me for like 15 years, and he was like, are the cockroaches a metaphor for colonialism? And he asked me this about 6-7 months after working on the film. So yes, there's such a thing as being too subtle. But I don't think Romero, particularly when you're casting a black man in your zombie film during the height of racial protests in the USC, exactly. Like, I don't think that's accidental. And when you start seeing the consumerism kick up in the 70s, and he decides to make a bunch of mindless, entities that represent humanity flock towards this mall, I don't think that's an accident either. And the fact that there's this whole sequence in the middle of the film where all the characters just become complacent. Like, they just come complacent living this domesticity, this domestic lifestyle in the middle of an apocalypse. So I don't think any of that stuff is accidental at all. It's very, very deliberate. And to speak to his intent, I mean, like, he would have to have done it. The weird thing is, I find it's like that's his masterpiece, Dawn of the Dead, and it's almost like he keyed in on the politics of it. It's like, oh, well, that's why these are considered masterpieces. And then he started doing it much more explicitly, like with the Day of the Dead, and then whatever the name of the one, City of the Dead, whatever the one he did.
Yeah, Land of the Dead.
Land of the Dead, that's what it was, with the Gazmo. When he starts doing that and becomes much more hyper aware of the politics, that's when the films start to, drop off in quality. So
exactly. Yeah, and he did it too. I mean, he did another one where it was all sort of videotaped. I think it was called Diary of the Dead. So it was this sort of attempt to do it, to recreate, you say a minutia, and sort of like the zeitgeist of whatever is happening at that moment. And I do think they tapered off. Growing up as
they flipped the intent flipped.
Yeah.
Because you were right when you said, let's make a kick-ass zombie movie and set it in a mall about consumerism. And it's almost as if he flipped that around. It's like, I want to make a critique on consumerism in these later films. It wasn't consumerism, it was the politics at the time. But it became obvious that's what he was doing. And then the joy of the zombie kind of left the film. And it was, I think, during a time where zombie fatigue really started to kick in.
Oh my God. Yeah. Were you worried about that zombie fatigue with Blood Quantum? Because, I had sort of tuned out of zombies. But Blood Quantum offered me enough of a switch on the film to incite my interest again. Particularly, sorry, go ahead.
I was hyper aware of it. I was because we wrote this 15 years ago, whatever it was. We wrote it quite a while ago, and this was during the apex of zombie craziness. And I was like, I want to do a zombie film because I want to do a zombie film. And everybody discouraged me. My management is actually the guys, those are the guys that are kind of quasi behind The Walking Dead. And they were like, you don't want to do The Walking Dead, man. Zombies are played out. And I'm like, no, let's do a zombie film. And that's actually how the idea manifested, was because like zombies are played out. If you wanted to do a zombie movie, it can't just be, dead people running around trying to eat you. It needs to be something more than that. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, that's literally how the conversation went. It was like, I want to do a zombie movie. You can't do a zombie movie that are played out. And then I literally answered, what if I made the natives immune to the zombie plague? The idea happened that fast. So
did they just kind of lean back in their chairs and go, good, that's interesting. I could see that happening.
Yeah, it's kind of what happened. It was like, wow, that's a good idea. And then it was just everything stemmed from that idea. And I was like, well, what's the story? And I thought about The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand, where there was a small portion of the population was immune, and Franny was one of the main characters. She ended up getting pregnant by a guy who wasn't immune. So then you had this baby, and the big question was, is the baby going to be immune or is it going to die? So I figured, that's something that could carry in a zombie movie too, where one part of the population is immune to the zombie plague. And that's really literally how it happened. It was just that simple. And then it was another 15 years of writing.
Yeah. Wow. It amazes me how long it takes to get a film off the ground. Like 15 years of a good idea it took to get to the screen. Well, the culture had to catch up to the idea, honestly. So, and we're talking about the indigenous culture. I mean, the culture that would accept an indigenous director.
The settler culture, the colonial culture, because remember, 10 years ago, like colonialism, settler, that wasn't a loaded term. That isn't the term that it was today. That nobody was calling white people settler or anything like that. So when I wrote this film, nobody knew what it was about. As a matter of fact, I'll go one step further. When I wrote the film, directed the film, finished the film, and we set it up to screen at Toronto, I still didn't have faith in the audience in that they were gonna get what they were watching. And I was right. It wasn't until the pandemic hit in March that everybody, that forced isolation that made everybody wake up into what it is I was saying and doing with the film. And then Nova Scotia happened with the fishery rights, and then you start seeing it even more how the film was making comments on not zombie culture, but the world culture. I mean, that's ultimately whatever zombie movie is. I mean, if there's one thing you can't really seem to avoid is the idea that we're the zombies are us, that kind of thing. But I think it was the first time that you ever really, I mean, it was really an extension of Romero's idea of, taking consumerism and turning it into a mindless, entity that consumes everything in front of it. I took it one step further than Romero in the sense that I carried it back in history a little bit more and kind of linked the birth of capitalism and consumerism with colonialism, and then made that whole thing as a metaphor for, environmentalism and everything else. And I think that's, what you do as a good artist to a certain extent is you stand on the shoulders of, bigger minds that came before you, and you try to extend their ideas. Somebody made a really good critique of Blood Quantum that I like, and it was to say that it was the film that Romero seems to have tried to make since Day of the Dead. And I really took that to heart, because that's kind of what I was trying to do. And it was trying to drag the zombies back into politics and to turn it into what I always thought it was meant to be, which is, a critique on modern culture.
So you said about standing on the shoulders of great minds that came before you. Who might some of those shoulders belong to?
For me, I'm really a literary guy. Well, literary, I I use the term loosely, but I mentioned Stephen King, Clive Barker. Those are the guys that I grew up reading. I've really been getting into Laird Barron lately. William S. Burroughs. I've really cut my teeth as a writer in poetry and short fiction. So I've never really studied filmmaking until I got to university. And when I did that, it was all technique. It was like, all right, how do we do this? How do we create this effect? How do we do that effect? And I came up during a time where it was like, P.T. Anderson, Tarantino, those guys, David Fincher, like all those guys, that new wave of American cinema. Those are the guys that I grew up realizing that they were going to be the Del Toro's another one. They were going to be the ones that, dictated the ebb and flow of what cinema is going to be for the next 30, 40 years. So that's really where I kind of started honing my visual look. But then I like, pretty obscure guys like the Quay brothers, Chris Cunningham for a while. I don't know if you know him. He was a music video director, and he was supposed to be doing William Gibson's a Neuromancer for a while, but he seemed to have come to his senses and realized what kind of nightmare filmmaking is. So he stopped doing it, and he's doing theater now or something. I really get influenced by artists. I'm not really a filmmaker guy in the sense that, I was in my backyard with a Super 8, like, making World War II movies. I was never that guy. I was always everything art. And I never really looked at film as an art form, even though when I got to university, I realized that I had an aptitude for it. And then like just any other lazy teenager, I was just like, let's do this for a while. It seems like the easiest thing for me to do because I already seem to be good at it. And that's how I kind of started doing it. But prior to that, it was like I was really into Salvador Dali as a kid too. Salvador Dali, reading a lot of William S. Burroughs. I had this poetry book called Naked Poetry that influenced me a lot. I was really into transgressive literature too, like Chuck Palahniuk and Carlton Mellick is another one that I really love. So it seems like all the interesting stuff going on in art seems to be happening in comics, literature, and the art scene. And it's cinema is like 50 years behind, and you start getting stuff, like what's, again, to go back to comic books, what's all the rave now? Comic books. Those fucking storylines have been around for like 30, 40 years. Like if you're a 40-year-old guy, you've already been through all these, the Infinity Gauntlet stories, like all that stuff, the Death of Phoenix, those were all the big moments in our comic childhood upbringing. So we've seen all this before, and it's kind of boring cinema to a certain extent, because if you've seen the storylines before, you know how it's going to go, and really you're just there for the design elements, which I really appreciate personally. I mean, that's really why I watch these films, because I want to see how they're going to design the characters. I want to see how they're going to manifest the comic look in the real world. So I've never really studied film until I got in university, and they forced you to. But I've always
did the studying.
What's that?
Did the studying hurt? Did the studying hurt the instincts, or did the studying honed the instincts that you already had?
I think when you're a student, anything, you're gonna pick and choose what you like. And for me, while I was studying, it was, how do people do these techniques? Like, how did Kubrick pull this off, and how can I apply it to what I'm doing? That's what I did anyway. I mean, I was just kind of building up my arsenal. I didn't really look at it like culturally, if that makes any sense. I didn't really look at like what did cinema verte mean for the culture in France at the time? Like, who fucking cares? I don't know. I don't care. But I could see how the aesthetic would help the culture of Jeff Barnaby growing up in the 80s on the reserve. That's basically my approach to how I studied cinema. Like, how can some of these techniques translate into my world? And I kind of drift more towards, Kubrick and Tarantino and guys like that. So I come from a really hardcore masculine perspective from my visual aesthetic. But when I drift into storytelling, I prefer female protagonists to a certain extent, with the exception of Blood Quantum, because that was all about, that was about male relationships on a reserve, and it was about fatherhood. It was about being a native man to a certain extent. So, but
it's strong female characters too.
Yeah.
I thought, they weren't just waiting around for things to happen.
No, but they weren't prominent. I mean, they weren't.
No,
they weren't prominent in the story. We're actually doing.
No.
I'm in the middle of doing the outlines for a Blood Quantum TV show, and that's where those characters are probably going to shine more.
So it'll pick up from when they leave. I call it the fort. At the end, when they leave the fort, I'll pick up from there, perhaps.
No, it's actually going to be the space in between the first and second acts, where 6 months, like what happens during those 6 months, like how did they get the bridge set up? Like, how did they become so suspicious of white people in the first place? All that stuff. I mean, all that stuff's going to be in there. Why is Rufus, the zombie, still on the wall? Like, nobody really asked that of Blood Quantum, right? It's like, why the fuck do they have a zombie on the wall? And I'll tell you this story now. It's because the zombie was there as a litmus test, or a blood quantum test, if you will, because there was people from outside the community showing up saying, we're native too. So they were saying, well, if you're native, you're going to be immune to the plague, and all you need to do to get in is have this zombie bite you and survive. That was the reason. That was the reason Rufus was on the wall there. He was like, if you want to get in, you have to bite, you have to get bit, and you have to wait outside in our quarantine. And if you're still alive tomorrow, you can come in.
Oh my God. You could see, okay. So you could see how this film falls right into the COVID-19 area, why people picked up on that. But also there again, people claiming to be native. I mean, that has got to be an issue in the indigenous community. The film also, I thought, really hit on the nose point when I felt so sorry for this guy, bringing in his deceased daughter and the blanket, and the woman getting so angry at him because of the blanket and what might be on that blanket, which of course is a throwback to the Europeans bringing blankets with diseases on them that infected entire indigenous communities.
Yeah. Except it wasn't the indigenous community in the film that was worried about getting infected.
Yeah. But I did feel so sorry for that guy.
It was a clever movie.
Yeah, it was. It is.
Pat myself on the back, but when you start to think about it, it starts really, kind of blowing your mind a little bit, because it's stuff that nobody really talks about, and it's in there, like you just mentioned, that throwaway blanket moment. It's like, oh, you can't bring that in here. Obviously, you can't bring it in here. It's an infected blanket, but at the same time, what is it commenting on? And then you start looking at the entirety of the movie. So there's little beats like that all over the place in the film. That one's the most obvious, but there's stuff like that that's regional. Like, if you're not from Canada, you're not going to pick it up. You're not going to see some of the references or the beats. But I'm hoping like little moments like that, the heavy-handed stuff, is what's going to lead you down the rabbit hole to see, oh, what else is there?
Yeah. I do want to bring up, whenever I talk about indigenous characters in film and the old Westerns from when I grew up, which is several decades before you started growing up, John Ford takes a lot of slack for his depiction of indigenous people. Yet in one of his most criticized films for that, there is a character, terrible. He's not played by an indigenous person. His name is Scar. And he talks about, when John Wayne confronts him, and he talks about why he is doing what he's doing, he repeats all the people he lost in his own life because of the white men, because of white settlers coming in. The movie doesn't ask us to empathize with them, but it's hard not to at some point relate to them. First of all, I guess this question really doesn't matter if you've never seen The Searchers. But if you have seen The Searchers and you do remember this part, was that in some way John Ford trying to say there's another side to all this story?
I mean, in his way, I guess, but you're still centralizing the act of you're still centralizing white perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real kind of what you're seeing now, almost a precursor to white liberalism and it wanting to position Native people in a place of pity almost, in order for them to justify, their actions. And I think I've done that to a certain extent too, but I've teased the audience into kind of saying, like, Lysol would be a good example. He's, effectively killed children too by his actions, but I don't give him any position. Like, if you look at Lysol's turn in Blood Quantum, you might even be confused. Whereas, like, why is he so angry? Because that was a really common question. Like, why is he so angry? Because I didn't want to give him that Scar, reason. Like, oh, I lost my mom, and I grew up in foster care, and I got molested, and my mom got murdered and raped, and all this stuff that was implied throughout the story, but never really given a time in the story to act as justification for the things that he has done. Because I think what you're doing to a certain extent when you have a character do that is, well, that's definitively what he's doing in the film anyway, in my film, Blood Quantum, not Searchers, but he is going against his culture in order to satiate his own compulsions for revenge. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Scar was doing too. But I think what Ford did was he tried to justify it. Whereas when I do it in Blood Quantum, my version of Scar gets murdered by his brother because he's lost his way. And even the brother, you could tell he didn't want to do it. So, I mean, it's a lot more complicated. And I think to just wrap it up in this neat little narrative bow of, I was wronged, or go, I'm going to wrong you. I don't think that plays now.
Right.
You can still sit there and say The Searchers is one of the greatest films ever made. Sure. But I think to a certain extent, the relationship is been dragged out into the light. So I don't think either one of those, either one of those reasons works anymore. And you think of the villain of Scar's the villain of The Searchers, but is he really? Isn't it John Wayne's character?
Yeah,
that's
Ethan
really
Hawke,
the,
I think his name is.
Yeah.
He's terribly villainous in that film, I think. And I think...
Yeah, he has like this nefarious background. You kind of get the impression that he did some fucked up stuff in the war.
Mm-hmm. He admittedly will kill his niece, who he loves, because she was in the contact with the native people. He's willing to kill her.
There you go. I mean, there's fucking no better metaphor for racism right there.
Yeah.
That action.
I'm
and
not
I think
sure
that's
everybody...
kind of what, and I think that's exactly what Lysol does, right? It's like, I'm going to kill my niece, his unborn niece, because he ended up getting her bit. I'm going to kill my niece rather than, let my brother carry on a relationship with these evil white people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, talking to you has made me need to see Blood Quantum yet a third time. This is great. It's interesting. We talk about colonialism and how that term wasn't used for some time. I have a teenager who has informed me that, when she's really mad at me, she calls me a colonizer. and she
that's funny.
and she has informed me that she's moving to Europe as soon as she's old enough, because she refuses to live on stolen land. So and and this is a young woman, a girl, she's only 13, who really is trying to make herself aware of her country's history, or at least the country she lives in, whether it's hers or not, and the political climate of the time. I join you in laughing. I think it's both great and funny, and at the same time, I don't want to lose my daughter to Europe. But what do you think?
Well, she's gonna have some rude awakenings when she gets to either Scotland or Ireland. Which I don't know about stolen land. Well, that's like everywhere. Where are you going?
Yeah. Well, we suggested that, but that didn't hold much water.
Well, it's all. I think you need to look at it from the perspective of colonialism is capitalism, and you think the two are only separated by time, but that's not really true. They're separated by nothing, really. There is no separation. For me, colonialism and capitalism are the same thing. Like, they talk about late stage capitalism. I mean, it's based on this idea that you invade a sovereign country's land and you steal their resources. And to sit there and say that the West isn't running by those same principles is absurd. Because where the fuck are you getting your oil from, first of all? I mean, it's not all coming out of it's not all coming out of Texas. So I think this culture, the Western culture, has been stagnant since that time, because that's been the model. They've never deviated from it. And you can qualify what we're going through right now as, an awakening or whatever you want to call it. But I think even moving all the philosophical stuff aside, the only way the colonial system of existence stays in the practice is if all these resources are infinite, and they're not. So at some point, this is all going to crumble. It's just a question of how. It's not a question of when. So it's like, you could stay put, young lady, because we're gonna be getting the apocalypse here too. So don't worry about it. You don't need to move to Europe, because there's a good fucking chance if you get there, there's gonna be no gas to get you back. You're gonna be
there you go.
You're gonna be coming over on boat for about a month and a half.
Well, she is a very politicized young lady at this point, and I kind of hope it continues on. But I hope my ancestors don't offend her so much that she can't come and visit now and then.
Well, it's a fucking that's, you know what? Like, to deviate from the topic a little, that's really, when you talk about politicized, there's a performative angle to it that's really one of the most nefarious qualities of capitalism, in that they can take the resistance and they can put it on a t-shirt and start selling it. So you're no longer a part of the resistance, you're a part of the fucking problem.
Yes.
So that's what you're seeing here now, particularly with social media, which are these little narcissistic, enclaves to start off with, and everything's in an echo chamber. Your politics are defined by what's popular, and what's popular is dictated to you by what sells. So you're in this fucking infinite loop of repeating the same mistakes. That's the crazy thing about capitalism. It self-perpetuates itself, and it ties in so well with Native representation, because they sold Native people a million times over. They franchised the genocide. Like, the one fucking thing that you think you wouldn't be able to do, they did. Like, nobody's going to take what happened at the Holocaust and start selling I survived the Holocaust and all I got were these stupid t-shirts.
Wow.
You're not going to get any of that stuff. But you could do that with Native people, because for 100 years, cinema has taken the Native image and turned it into this malignant, violent savage that are going to come and eat your babies. So by virtue of that, you can sit there and have a football team called the Redskins, which they just got rid of. There's 50 other teams with Native names, so it doesn't really matter. And you could sell that to the tune of billions of dollars, and nobody's going to sit there and ask, didn't we wipe these people out with plagues and violence and starvation? Wow. Isn't this a bit tacky that we're doing this? So there's stuff going on right now that I think is just being, addressed in a servile, really superficial way. Like, it's Black Lives Matter. I'm going to tweet that a couple of times, ergo I'm not racist. But it's a lot more complicated than that, and it's going to take more than a social media campaign to undo it all. You're talking a fundamental rewrite of culture, and to come out of it on the other side, not being oil dependent, completely rethinking the structure of our governments. I mean, fuck, you think that's going to happen overnight? I'm reading this book now. I forget the name of it, but the basic premise is that any revolution in a culture, in a society, the catalyst is always going to be some great violence or great calamity. So I don't think we've actually hit that yet. Even with the pandemic and the way things are going now, you kind of pray and you hope this is the nexus where you don't need that, where human consciousness has come to the point where they can make decisions without being forced into them.
Wow. You gave us a lot to think about, and you gave us a lot of your time. I want you to get back writing your TV series. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to both times we've met has been virtually, and I look forward to meeting you in person sometime.
Yeah, so do I. I hope we survive this and we can have a drink somewhere. God, fuck, that would be awesome.
I know. I might have one now. You take care. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
having
me.
A huge thank you to Jeff Barnaby for sharing his time with us. You can find Jeff on Twitter @TripGore. Be sure to check out the show notes for more ways to watch his films. Rewind Fast Forward is hosted by Thom Ernst and produced with original theme music by Moira Demorest. That's me. Support for this podcast comes from the Kingston Canadian Film Festival, which is situated on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. This podcast is generously funded by the Canada Council for the Arts